Welcome to The Debate. Right now, there is a line of code sitting on a server somewhere in Virginia, just buying and selling electricity futures. It has no manager, it draws no salary, and honestly, by the time I finish the sentence, it will have generated more wealth than the average human makes in a decade.
Yeah, which is terrifying and fascinating all at once.
Right? I mean, traditionally, when we think about wealth generation, we picture a physical engine. A factory floor with steel presses or a bustling trading pit. You can point to the human labor, the raw materials, the actual physical output. The causality is entirely visible.
Exactly. Sweat equals equity. Production equals profit. We like to see the hands on the levers. But as we sit here in early 2026, that traditional engine has been completely replaced by something entirely invisible and, more importantly, completely autonomous.
We are witnessing this profound transformation. Artificial intelligence has evolved from just a human-directed tool into an independent economic actor. It's no longer just software that helps a human do their job faster.
No, not at all.
We are talking about high-frequency trading bots executing millions of trades per second based on unstructured data. We're talking about AI algorithms independently redesigning global supply chains in real time to exploit shipping inefficiencies, and generative models creating and monetizing digital assets without a single human pulling the strings. AI is engineering automatic income on an unprecedented planetary scale.
And the sheer scale of it is just staggering. When you look at the deployments across global finance, e-commerce, agriculture, generative media, you realize this isn't just a technological upgrade. It is an entirely new economic paradigm.
Which brings us to our central question today. PwC has predicted that AI will add $15.7 trillion to global GDP by 2030. So our debate centers on the structural nature of that wealth. Does this autonomous revenue generation fundamentally shift toward a decentralized, democratized global economy, or does it merely hyperscale the concentration of wealth into the hands of existing tech monopolies and financial institutions?
A $15.7 trillion question, quite literally.
Indeed. And to lay our cards on the table, I will be arguing that AI's autonomous revenue generation fundamentally democratizes economic opportunity. It is drastically lowering the traditional barriers to entry that have historically kept everyday people out of high-leverage wealth creation.
And I will be arguing the exact opposite. I believe that the structural reliance on massive data pipelines and immense compute infrastructure inherently concentrates this new wealth among a highly privileged tech elite. It masks monopolistic extraction behind a facade of democratization.
Well, let's get right into it. From my perspective, AI is serving as a decentralized profit engine that is actively breaking down the historical barriers to wealth creation. For centuries, generating significant capital required, capital.
Right.
It required institutional backing, physical infrastructure, armies of personnel. Today, those prerequisites have effectively evaporated. Consider a loan developer sitting in Bangalore. Today, they can rent GPU time in the cloud for fractions of a cent to run arbitrage bots on crypto exchanges. They are competing in markets that used to require a literal seat on Wall Street.
I come at it from a different way. The examples you're citing are fascinating, sure, but they represent a microscopic sliver of the actual wealth being generated. You're pointing out the anomalies while ignoring the macro structure.
But it's not just developers writing code, and it's definitely not a microscopic sliver. Look at the solopreneurs utilizing generative tools like Midjourney. Midjourney alone is generating north of $200 million annually as a platform, but the downstream wealth is what actually matters.
Individual creators are autonomously generating highly complex digital assets, iterating thousands of designs a day and monetizing them on global marketplaces like OpenSea. They are capturing pure yield without needing a design agency or a marketing firm or an initial capital investment. The AI acts as their entire corporate infrastructure. Okay, the accessibility of the tool is undeniable, I'll give you that. But true autonomy in this ecosystem is a mirage.
A mirage?
Absolutely. It masks massive capital and infrastructure concentration. Let's look at the reality of global markets, since you brought up finance. Algorithmic trading now dominates over 80% of U.S. stock market volume. The entities reaping the billions here aren't lone developers in Bangalore. They are mega firms like Renaissance Technologies and Citadel.
Well, wait. I'm not saying Citadel isn't making billions. Of course they are, but you can't ignore the downstream effects. The underlying technology is becoming universally available. Look at global agriculture or microfinance.
How so?
Data to autonomously approve loans and boost crop yields by 30%, or AI systems partnering with M-Pesa to grant microloans in seconds. That is AI generating wealth by including populations that were previously completely ignored by legacy institutions.
I hear you, but the structural moats around that technology are insurmountable. The true wealth flows to those who own the foundational infrastructure and the proprietary data oceans. Let's dig into how those high-frequency trading AIs actually work. They don't just look at ticker prices. They use long, short-term memory networks, or LSTMs.
Which have revolutionized predictive modeling.
Right, but we need to understand how they do it. Unlike older algorithms that just look at a snapshot in time, an LSTM has a built-in memory cell. It functions almost like a superhuman financial historian. It can weigh the context of a shipping port delay in Shanghai last month, cross-reference it against a sudden spike in social media sentiment today, and use that temporal correlation to predict a commodity price tomorrow. To do that accurately, you need real-time satellite imagery, proprietary news feeds, and massive server farms situated physically adjacent to the stock exchange, just to shave off milliseconds of latency. A developer in Bangalore mathematically cannot compete with that.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. You are focusing entirely on the ownership of the base model and the raw data. But the democratization of wealth generation happens at the application layer. Think of AI infrastructure like a newly built global power grid.
Okay.
Building a foundational model is like building a nuclear power plant. It takes billions in capital, years of research, massive infrastructure. But the APIs, the application programming interfaces, they're just the electrical sockets.
A socket with a meter attached.
A meter that charges pennies for what used to cost millions. The developer doesn't need to build a reactor, they just plug their appliance into the wall. Platforms like Alpaca and QuantConnect provide access to AI-driven algorithmic trading engines. They allow retail traders globally to execute complex, automated AI strategies without needing to own a server farm or an exchange. Or look at enterprise APIs. When Alibaba's Taobao plugs into massive transformer architectures to boost their sales conversions by 20%, we are talking about an attention mechanism.
Exactly, which is the core of modern natural language and behavioral processing.
Right. The algorithm isn't just looking at the last item a user bought. The attention mechanism weighs the relationship between every single item in their browsing history simultaneously to predict exactly what will trigger a purchase.
Yeah.
That requires insane compute to build, yes. But via an API, a small e-commerce startup in Jakarta can plug into that exact same cognitive power. OpenAI's APIs allow Indian call centers to do the same thing. The intelligence is a utility now. It's democratized access to cognitive power.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. The power grid analogy sounds highly equitable, but it completely ignores the fundamental economics of machine learning. The marginal costs of running these models, the inference phase, that only plummets after the training phase.
Well, sure.
And training a foundational model requires petabytes of data and immense concentrated compute power. The APIs you mentioned, they still run on centralized cloud infrastructure like AWS or Alibaba Cloud. The rent is always paid to the monopoly.
Calling it rent diminishes the absolute value the end user is able to retain, though. If paying Amazon a fraction of a cent per API call allows a startup to double its revenue, that is wealth creation for the startup.
It is margin creation for the startup, but wealth concentration for the monopoly. Take Amazon itself. Amazon's collaborative filtering AI doesn't just suggest products. It runs thousands of alternate realities, A/B tests, every single second. It's not just a recommendation algorithm. It is effectively an invisible sales force of 1 million people working 24/7, optimizing the layout of the digital store uniquely for every single customer who walks in. That autonomous system drives over $100 billion in yearly sales.
Which is an absolute marvel of optimization.
It is, but it creates what we call the cold start problem for everyone else. A smaller competitor mathematically cannot catch up because they simply do not possess the underlying user interaction data to train their models to that level of predictive accuracy. And let's look at the generative models you praised earlier. When you say Midjourney, you have to understand the mechanism of diffusion models.
They start with random noise and refine it into an image.
Exactly. The model starts with pure static, like a broken TV screen, and step by step removes that noise based on mathematical probabilities until a high-definition image emerges. But figuring out those precise probabilities required analyzing billions of images on massive server farms. Look at the IP disputes like Getty Images versus Stability AI.
Right, the copyright lawsuits.
Yes. The democratization you're praising relies entirely on the uncompensated extraction of data from original creators. We have a system where foundational monopolies extract massive amounts of human-created data, concentrate it using billions of dollars of compute, and then rent it back to the public via those APIs you love. That is a definition of wealth concentration dressed up as democratization.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. You are looking at the digital extraction, but we've been talking entirely about the digital ether, data, algorithms, pixels. The real wealth explosion, the true absolute wealth creation, rather than just the redistribution of digital assets, happens when you take that digital brain and put it inside a physical machine. This isn't a zero-sum game of who owns the data.
So you're talking about real-world efficiency now.
Exactly. AI's autonomous optimization is creating entirely new wealth by systematically eliminating physical waste in the real world. Let's look at agriculture again. John Deere has deployed their See and Spray AI across the U.S. Midwest. This isn't just an algorithm making a recommendation to a farmer. It uses edge computing and computer vision on moving tractors to process millions of images in real time, instantly distinguishing between a crop and a weed.
Right.
It is a phenomenal technological achievement. I'm not denying that. But you are looking at the upside of the physical deployment without acknowledging the severe edge cases and the systemic bias.
Every industrial revolution has risks, though. A tractor is inherently more dangerous than a horse, but it generates exponentially more yield.
Yes, but the speed and autonomy here make the systemic fragility entirely unique. When AI operates autonomously at millisecond speeds to optimize the physical world, it introduces a level of economic systemic risk that we have never seen before.
How so?
Well, take those AI lending systems in global microfinance you mentioned earlier. We've already seen studies showing they can autonomously deny loans to minorities, amplifying existing inequalities rather than fixing them. And let's step away from microfinance and look at macro infrastructure. In Australia, the Commonwealth Bank uses AI to trade electricity futures.
Right. To balance the grid?
Exactly. The algorithm autonomously balances the supply from solar farms with sudden demand spikes across the grid. It buys and sells at lightning speed, profiting from the volatility.
Which, I have to point out, is necessary for a renewable grid to function efficiently. Humans just cannot calculate grid loads fast enough.
True. But what happens when the algorithm hallucinates a correlation? We saw the precursor to this in the 2010 financial flash crash triggered by rogue algorithmic trading. But now, scale that up from stock prices to physical utilities. When critical infrastructure like the energy grid is optimized for profit by autonomous agents operating faster than human oversight, we are one data anomaly away from a systemic crisis. If the AI misinterprets weather data and dumps electricity futures, it can artificially spike energy prices for millions of people in seconds. The wealth generated by that day-to-day efficiency is captured by the corporation running the bot. The systemic risk of a flash crash is borne entirely by the public.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because it assumes human markets are somehow less fragile or less prone to systemic failure. Human traders caused the 2008 financial crisis through deliberate obfuscation, not a millisecond calculation error. And if your primary concern is that centralized corporate monopolies are capturing the wealth and externalizing the risk, then we really have to look at the ultimate endpoint of AI autonomy, which is decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs.
Integrating AI with blockchain infrastructure?
Precisely. Because this is where the democratization argument reaches its logical, undeniable conclusion. AI doesn't just bypass human labor at the task level, it can bypass the traditional corporate structure entirely. A DAO uses smart contracts to effectively replace the C-suite. It's software executing financial decisions automatically based on hard-coded rules rather than a board of directors voting behind closed doors.
In theory, yes. But how does the AI actually interact with it?
We are already seeing it in practice. MakerDAO uses AI oracles, which are basically systems that feed real-world data into the blockchain, to autonomously adjust interest rates on-chain. It manages treasuries worth billions without a centralized corporate board. Or look at Singularity Net. They have created an open AI marketplace that allows AI agents to trade services peer-to-peer globally. One AI agent can recognize it needs more processing power, autonomously hire another AI agent to process that data, pay it in cryptocurrency, and return the finished product to a user. This proves, mechanically, that AI can govern treasuries and distribute value equitably, completely outside the walled gardens of Silicon Valley monopolies.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered the actual enterprise reality we are currently living in? DAOs and smart contracts are a fascinating theoretical frontier, sure, but they are a fringe experiment compared to where the real autonomous wealth is currently being locked in.
You don't think decentralized finance protocols will scale the challenged traditional enterprise?
I think the economic gravity is entirely on the side of legacy giants. Gartner forecasts that 85% of enterprises will be using embedded AI tools by the end of 2026. Look at the pharmaceutical industry. Pfizer isn't using a DAO. They are using AI to simulate the physical dynamics of molecular folding. Instead of human scientists physically pipetting compounds for years, the AI simulates millions of chemical reactions in a virtual environment, slashing their R&D costs by 25%.
But those same simulation tools, the AI accelerating molecular discovery, they are also available via cloud APIs to tiny biotech startups. The startup doesn't need a billion-dollar lab anymore, they just need the software.
Available, yes. But who monetizes the ultimate result? Who has the capital to navigate the FDA trials, manufacture the drug, and control the global distribution network?
Well,
the reality is that human labor is rapidly being transformed into mere oversight for corporate conglomerates. Google's generative AI autonomously filed over 1,000 patents in 2024 alone, covering everything from drug discovery to next-generation chip design. When a single monopoly's AI files 1,000 patents, it is legally locking up the intellectual property of the future. Crypto arbitrage bots and AI oracles are interesting, but they are a drop in the bucket compared to the trillions of dollars being consolidated by megacaps optimizing their global empires. The AI isn't replacing the corporation, it is making the corporation infinitely more powerful and insulated from competition.
I hear your skepticism. I really do. But if we synthesize the landscape we've covered today, I believe the evidence for widespread economic empowerment remains incredibly robust. We aren't just talking about abstract theories or isolated Silicon Valley success stories here. We are talking about fundamental mechanisms of leverage being handed directly to the individual.
Access is definitely expanding.
Right. Whether it's the rural farmer in India using Microsoft's Farm Beats to predict crop prices and optimize their harvest, or creators monetizing digital videos via Runway ML, AI has definitively lowered the threshold for accessing global revenue streams. It acts as a decentralized engine, allowing smaller players to punch vastly above their historical weight class. They're capturing yield that used to require armies of analysts and massive institutional capital.
And yet, if we step back and look at the macroeconomic structure, the dependency remains absolute. The autonomous systems driving those local efficiencies, the APIs, the computer vision models, the predictive text, they are fundamentally tethered to massive datasets and centralized cloud infrastructure. The sheer volume of capital captured by entities like high-frequency trading firms leveraging LSTMs, Amazon's algorithmic optimization engines, and tech megacaps filing thousands of AI-generated patents shows a starkly different reality. AI is a magnificent tool for efficiency, yes, but structurally, it accelerates the concentration of wealth. It builds a global economy where the owners of the foundational models and the data pipelines capture the lion's share of the value, while the users at the edges are left fighting over the margins.
It is clear we are looking at two very different sides of a rapidly spinning coin here. But I think we can both acknowledge a shared reality. AI is no longer a passive tool waiting for a human prompt. It is an active, independent economic participant that is fundamentally redefining the mechanics of planetary prosperity.
Absolutely. The transition from human operation to human oversight is already complete in many of these sectors. The algorithms are running the show, optimizing the supply chains, executing the trades.
And the tension between equitable distribution, the individual developer plugging into an API, and hyper-capital concentration, the mega-cap tech giants owning the foundational models, well, that remains entirely unresolved. How humanity chooses to harness this unprecedented technological force won't just be decided by the code itself, but by the guardrails we put in place. For those listening, I highly suggest exploring the evolving regulatory frameworks being drafted right now, such as the EU AI Act's focus on high-risk system transparency or China's state oversight guidelines. These legal structures will dictate how the underlying data is treated and ultimately how the wealth is distributed.
The regulatory response will absolutely dictate whether this technology serves the many or the few, because the market alone will simply optimize for whatever metric it is programmed to chase.
Which brings us right back to where we started. The invisible engine is running. The factory has no walls, and the gears are moving at millisecond speeds, generating trillions in value. The wealth is being created right now, all around us. The only question left is who really owns the output. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.